Life has a funny way of blindsiding you, doesn't it? One moment, everything seems just fine, stable, predictable even. And the next, your world comes crashing down around you, leaving you to pick up the shattered pieces of what you once thought was an unbreakable life. My name is John, and this is my story of betrayal, anger, and a journey to reclaim my dignity. I met Sarah, my wife, when we were both fresh out of college. She was beautiful, with a smile that could light up a room and an infectious laugh that made you forget all your worries. We were inseparable, building a life together filled with dreams of a future we would carve out hand in hand. We married young, too young some might say, but we were madly in love. We had two wonderful children, Emily and Jack, who became the center of our universe. I worked as an engineer for a large tech firm, while Sarah stayed home to raise our kids. It was a mutual decision. I would provide, and she would nurture. It worked well for us, at least for the first few years. Our marriage had its ups and downs like any other, but I believed we had a strong foundation of love and trust. Or so I thought. It was about 2 years ago when things started to feel off. Sarah became more distant, often lost in her thoughts. She would spend more time on her phone, smiling at messages she never shared with me. Our conversations became shorter, less meaningful, and her once vibrant laughter seemed to have faded. I chalked it up to the pressures of raising teenagers and the natural ebb and flow of a long-term relationship. Then there was my job. I had recently been promoted to a senior position, which meant longer hours and more responsibilities. The pay was great, and I was able to provide a comfortable life for my family, but it also meant I was away from home more often. I trusted Sarah implicitly, never once doubting her loyalty or our bond. Little did I know my boss David, a charming, smooth-talking executive, was slowly weaving his way into my wife's life. David was everything you'd expect in a corporate shark, charismatic, confident, and always dressed to impress. He had a way of making everyone feel special, and it wasn't long before Sarah fell under his spell. I started noticing little things that didn't add up. Sarah would mention running into David at the grocery store or seeing him at the gym. At first, I dismissed it as coincidence, but as these encounters became more frequent, my suspicions grew. One day, I found a receipt from a fancy restaurant in her purse, a place we had never been to together. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off, saying she had lunch with a friend. My gut told me otherwise. Our intimate moments dwindled to almost nothing. Sarah was always too tired or too busy, and when we did make love, it felt mechanical, devoid of the passion we once shared. I felt like I was losing her, but every time I tried to talk to her about it, she would get defensive, accusing me of being paranoid or insecure. One evening, I came home early from work, hoping to surprise her with a date night. As I walked into our bedroom, I found her on the phone, her voice low and filled with a sweetness I hadn't heard in a long time. When she saw me, she quickly ended the call, her face flushed with guilt. She claimed it was just a friend, but the look in her eyes told a different story. The final straw came when I overheard a conversation between Emily and Jack. They were whispering about Mom's special friend, and how she would get all dressed up to meet him. My heart sank. I knew I had to find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I began to dig deeper, going through her phone when she wasn't around, checking her emails, and even following her once or twice. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Sarah was having an affair with David, my boss. The texts between them were explicit, filled with declarations of love and plans for their next rendezvous. It was a betrayal of the highest order, not just from my wife but from someone I considered a mentor and friend. The initial shock was overwhelming. I felt a surge of emotions, anger, sadness, disbelief, all crashing over me like a tidal wave. How could she do this to me, to our family? I'd given her everything, sacrificed so much, and this was how she repaid me. In that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront her just yet. I needed to gather more evidence, to understand the full extent of their betrayal. And once I had all the pieces, I would confront them both and make them pay for the pain they had caused. Gathering evidence of Sarah's affair wasn't easy. It meant delving into the shadows of her life, uncovering truths I was never meant to see. The more I discovered, the more my anger simmered, turning into a burning rage that threatened to consume me. I needed to see them together, to confront them in a way that would leave no room for lies or denial. My opportunity came sooner than I expected. Sarah had mentioned a business dinner she needed to attend. It was the perfect cover for her illicit rendezvous with David. I decided to follow her, discreetly, to see if my suspicions were correct. I called a trusted friend, Tom, who worked as a private investigator. He set me up with the tools I needed to track her movements and record everything. That evening, Sarah dressed up more elegantly than I had seen in months. She kissed me goodbye, her lips cold against my cheek, and left with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I waited a few minutes before slipping out the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I followed her to an upscale restaurant on the other side of town. It was the kind of place where business deals were made and secrets were kept. I parked a safe distance away and watched as she walked inside. Minutes later, David arrived, his presence unmistakable even from a distance. He greeted her with a kiss, and they were led to a private booth at the back of the restaurant. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. The sight of them together was enough to make my blood boil. I waited until they were settled before heading inside, making sure to keep my head down and avoid drawing attention. I took a seat at the bar, where I had a clear view of their booth, but was far enough away to avoid suspicion. The waiter brought them a bottle of wine, and they toasted to something I couldn't hear. Their conversation was animated, filled with laughter and stolen glances. It was clear they were completely absorbed in each other, oblivious to the world around them. I pulled out my phone, snapping pictures and recording video, ensuring I captured every damning moment. As the night wore on, their intimacy became more blatant. David reached across the table, taking Sarah's hand in his. She leaned in, whispering something in his ear that made him laugh. The rage inside me built to a crescendo. I couldn't sit there any longer, watching them desecrate the sanctity of our marriage. I stood up, my movements deliberate, and walked towards their booth. My heart was pounding, and my vision was tinted red with fury. As I approached, David noticed me first. His smile faltered, replaced by a look of surprise and then fear. Sarah turned, her eyes widening in shock. "John, what are you doing here?" she stammered, her face pale. I ignored her, my gaze fixed on David. "You!" I spat, my voice low and dangerous. "You've been screwing my wife." David tried to stand, to say something, but I didn't give him the chance. I grabbed him by the collar, pulling him out of the booth and throwing him against the table. Glasses shattered, and patrons gasped, but I didn't care. My world had narrowed to this moment, this confrontation. "John, stop, please," Sarah screamed, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. David tried to push me away, but I was stronger, fueled by a rage that had been building for months. I landed a punch squarely on his jaw, the impact sending him sprawling to the floor. He groaned, clutching his face, but I wasn't finished. I grabbed him again, lifting him to his feet. "You think you can betray me, steal my wife, and get away with it?" I snarled, throwing him against another table. "John, stop it! You're going to kill him!" Sarah was crying now, trying to pull me away, but I shook her off. David managed to get to his feet, his face bloody and his eyes wild with fear. He tried to back away, but I was relentless. I punched him again, feeling the bones in his face give way under my knuckles. He stumbled, falling to the floor, and I stood over him, breathing heavily. "You're a coward, David. A lying, cheating coward. You don't deserve to live," I said, my voice shaking with fury. David coughed, blood spilling from his mouth. "Please, John. I'm sorry. I never meant for this to happen." "Sorry? You're sorry?" I laughed bitterly. "You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught." By now, the restaurant staff and other patrons had called for help. I could hear sirens in the distance, but it didn't matter. All I could see was the man who had destroyed my life, lying broken at my feet. "Get up," I demanded, grabbing him by the shirt and lifting him. "Get up and face me like a man." He tried to stand, his legs shaking, but he couldn't hold his ground. I shoved him away, watching as he fell again, his body crumpling against a chair. The sirens grew louder, and I knew I didn't have much time left. I turned to Sarah, who was sobbing uncontrollably. "You did this," I said coldly. "You brought this on yourself." "John, please," she begged, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I love you. Please, just stop." "Love?" I sneered. "You don't know the meaning of the word." The police burst into the restaurant, their shouts cutting through the chaos. I raised my hands, surrendering, but my eyes never left Sarah's. The look of horror and regret on her face was a small consolation, but it did nothing to quell the storm inside me. As the officers cuffed me and led me away, I knew that this was only the beginning. The confrontation had been brutal, but it was nothing compared to the emotional battle that lay ahead. My marriage was over, my trust shattered, and my life in ruins. But in that moment, all I felt was a grim satisfaction. David had paid for his betrayal, and Sarah would face the consequences of her actions. The drive to the police station was a blur. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me with a throbbing pain in my knuckles and a hollow feeling in my chest. I knew I would have to answer for what I had done, but right now, all I could think about was the devastation Sarah had caused. The cold, sterile air of the police station hit me as I was led through the doors, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on the linoleum floor. The officers were professional but firm, guiding me to a holding cell, where I would wait until I could speak to someone about the charges. Assault, maybe even attempted murder. My mind raced with the possibilities. I sat on the metal bench staring at the bars that separated me from the rest of the world. The adrenaline that had fueled my confrontation with David was gone, replaced by a gnawing emptiness. I replayed the events of the night in my head, wondering if there was any other way I could have handled it. But every time I thought of David's smug face and Sarah's betrayal, my anger flared anew. After what felt like hours, a police officer came to escort me to an interrogation room. He was a middle-aged man with a kind face, but his eyes were weary, as if he had seen too much in his years on the force. He guided me to a small room where a detective was waiting, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "Mr. Matthews, I'm Detective Roberts," she introduced herself, motioning for me to sit. "Do you understand why you're here?" I nodded, my voice hoarse. "Yes, I understand." "Good," she said, her tone professional. "I need you to tell me what happened tonight." Taking a deep breath, I recounted the events leading up to the confrontation, leaving nothing out. I told her about the months of suspicion, the evidence I had gathered, and the moment I finally decided to confront Sarah and David. Detective Roberts listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. "Do you understand the severity of your actions?" she asked once I finished. "I do," I replied. "But you have to understand, they betrayed me in the worst way possible." "Betrayal or not, Mr. Matthews, you took the law into your own hands," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "We'll need to take your statement and gather more evidence before we can proceed." I nodded, feeling a sense of resignation. I knew there would be consequences for my actions, and I was prepared to face them. But the thought of Sarah and David getting away with their betrayal was unbearable. After giving my statement and being processed, I was allowed to make a phone call. I dialed Tom, my private investigator friend, who answered on the first ring. "John, what the hell happened?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "I confronted them, Tom. It got physical," I admitted, feeling the weight of my actions pressing down on me. "Damn it, John. I told you to be careful," he sighed. "Look, I'll get down there and see what I can do. Just sit tight." As I hung up the phone, I felt a mixture of gratitude and guilt. Tom had warned me about letting my emotions get the best of me, but I hadn't listened. Now, I had to deal with the fallout. I was released on bail the next morning, Tom having pulled some strings to expedite the process. The ride home was silent, my thoughts a tangled mess of anger, regret, and betrayal. I knew I had to confront Sarah, to demand answers for her actions, but the thought of seeing her again made my stomach churn. When I walked through the front door of our home, the silence was deafening. Sarah was sitting on the couch, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. She looked up as I entered, her expression a mix of fear and sadness. "John," she began, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted any of this to happen." "Save it, Sarah," I snapped, my anger bubbling to the surface. "You've been lying to me for months. How long has this been going on?" She looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "About a year," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "A year?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You've been sneaking around with him for a year, and you expect me to believe you're sorry?" "I am sorry, John," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "I never wanted to hurt you. It just happened. I was lonely, and David was there. He made me feel wanted." "Lonely?" I scoffed. "I've been working my ass off to provide for this family, and you repay me by sleeping with my boss?" "It's not that simple," she cried. "You've been so distant, so consumed by your work. I needed someone to talk to, someone who understood me. And that someone had to be David!" I shouted, my frustration boiling over. Of all people, it had to be him! She sobbed, her shoulders shaking. I know I've made a terrible mistake, John, but please, can't we try to work through this? For the sake of our family? Our family? I laughed bitterly. You destroyed our family the moment you decided to sleep with him. How am I supposed to trust you after this? I'll do anything, she begged, her eyes desperate. I'll go to therapy. I'll quit my job. Anything to make this right. Make this right? I shook my head. There's no making this right, Sarah. You broke us. For a moment, the room was silent except for her sobs. I wanted to feel something. Anger, sadness, anything. But I was numb. The betrayal had cut so deep that I wasn't sure I could ever heal. I need time, I finally said, my voice flat. I need to figure out what I'm going to do next. She nodded, wiping her tears. I understand. But please, John, don't shut me out completely. We've been through so much together. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned and walked out of the room, the weight of our shattered marriage pressing down on me. I needed space, time to think, to process everything that had happened. But most of all, I needed to find a way to move forward, even if that meant doing it alone. I spent the next few days in a daze, avoiding Sarah and the painful conversations that loomed over us. I threw myself into work, hoping to drown out the chaos in my personal life. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw David's smug face and Sarah's tear-streaked cheeks, a constant reminder of their betrayal. One evening, as I sat in my office, the weight of it all became too much. I knew I couldn't keep running from the truth. I had to confront Sarah again, to lay everything out and decide the future of our relationship. Gathering my resolve, I headed home, my heart heavy with anticipation. When I walked through the door, Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in her hands. She looked up as I entered, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. I took a deep breath and sat down across from her, the silence between us thick with unspoken words. Sarah, I began, my voice steady. We need to talk. She nodded, setting her coffee aside. I know. I've been waiting for you to be ready. I took another deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. I can't keep living like this, Sarah. The trust between us is broken, and I don't know if it can ever be repaired. She looked down, her hands trembling. I know I've hurt you, John, and I know it's going to take a long time for you to forgive me, if you ever can, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. I appreciate that, I said, my voice softening. But it's not just about forgiveness. It's about whether or not we can rebuild what we had. Do you want to try? She asked, her eyes searching mine for any sign of hope. I hesitated, the memories of our life together warring with the pain of her betrayal. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to, for the sake of our family. But another part of me is so angry, so hurt, that I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again. Tears welled up in her eyes. I understand. But please, John, don't make any decisions right now. Let's take it one day at a time and see where we end up. I nodded slowly, knowing that this was just the beginning of a long and painful journey. Okay, I said finally. One day at a time. As we sat there, the silence between us filled with a mix of hope and uncertainty, I realized that no matter what happened, my life would never be the same. The road ahead was uncertain, but I knew that I had to face it head-on for better or worse. The days that followed were a blur of awkward conversations, tense silences, and fleeting moments of vulnerability. Sarah tried her best to prove she was committed to mending our broken marriage. She arranged counseling sessions, both individual and couples, and even quit her job as a gesture of her sincerity. But no matter how hard she tried, the gnawing pain of betrayal lingered, casting a shadow over every attempt at reconciliation. While Sarah was busy trying to make amends, I found myself consumed by thoughts of revenge. It wasn't enough to confront David and leave him bruised and bloody on the restaurant floor. No, he needed to feel the full weight of the damage he'd done, and so I began to plan. The idea of revenge took root one night as I sat alone in my office, nursing a glass of whiskey. I couldn't shake the image of David's smug face, the way he had wormed his way into my life and taken what was mine. He had to pay, and I was going to make sure he did. I started by gathering information, As a senior engineer at the company, I had access to a lot of sensitive data. I knew where to look and how to cover my tracks. I spent hours digging through emails, financial records, and internal communications, piecing together a picture of David's professional life. What I found was a treasure trove of unethical practices, shady deals, and corporate malfeasance. David had always been a smooth operator, but his arrogance had led him to believe he was untouchable. He wasn't. I documented everything meticulously, creating a dossier of evidence that could ruin him both personally and professionally. Next, I needed to find a way to release the information without implicating myself. That's where Tom came in. He was more than just a private investigator. He was also a master of digital forensics. I met him at a bar downtown where the dim lighting and loud music provided the perfect cover for our conversation. "John, are you sure you want to go through with this?" Tom asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "Once you start down this path, there's no turning back." "I'm sure," I replied, my voice steady. "He deserves to pay for what he's done. Not just to me, but to everyone he screwed over." Tom nodded, accepting my resolve. "All right, give me everything you've got, and I'll make sure it gets to the right people. But remember, this could get messy." "I'm ready for it," I said, handing over the flash drive containing the damning evidence. "Do whatever it takes." Over the next few weeks, Tom and I worked tirelessly to set the wheels in motion. We leaked the information anonymously to various media outlets, regulatory bodies, and even some of David's high-profile clients. The fallout was swift and brutal. News of David's unethical practices spread like wildfire. The company launched an internal investigation, suspending him indefinitely. Clients pulled out of contracts, stock prices plummeted, and the board of directors scrambled to contain the damage. David's once illustrious career was in tatters, his reputation irreparably damaged. But that wasn't enough for me. I needed to see him suffer on a personal level too. I wanted him to feel the same pain and humiliation I had felt. So, I took things a step further. I knew David had a family, a wife and 2 teenage daughters. They had no idea what kind of man he truly was. I made sure they found out. Using the same anonymous channels, I sent them copies of the evidence, along with details of his affair with Sarah. It was a cruel move, but in my mind, it was justified. The news hit David's family like a bombshell. His wife filed for divorce immediately, taking the girls and moving out of their lavish home. David was left alone, ostracized by his peers and abandoned by his loved ones. It was everything I had hoped for, and more. One evening, as I sat in my office, the satisfaction of my revenge still fresh in my mind, my phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "It's done. He's finished." I stared at the screen, a mix of emotions swirling inside me. I had achieved my goal, but at what cost? The revenge had been sweet, but it hadn't filled the void left by Sarah's betrayal. It hadn't repaired the damage to my heart or my soul. As I contemplated this, the door to my office creaked open, and Sarah stepped in. She looked tired, her eyes red from crying. She had been trying so hard to make things right, but I had been too consumed by my need for vengeance to notice. "John, can we talk?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. I nodded, gesturing for her to sit. She took a seat across from me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I know you're still hurting," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I know I've done terrible things, but I want to make it right. I want to earn back your trust, if you'll let me." I looked at her, the woman I had once loved more than anything, the woman who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. Could I ever truly forgive her? Could I ever move past the pain and rebuild what we once had? "I don't know if I can ever trust you again, Sarah," I admitted, my voice raw with emotion. "What you did, it broke something inside me, something that might never heal." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand, but please, John, give me a chance. Let me prove to you that I can be better, that we can be better." I sighed, the weight of the past few months pressing down on me. "I don't know, Sarah. I need time. Time to figure out if this is something we can salvage." She reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here, waiting, hoping that someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me." As we sat there, holding hands in the silence of my office, I realized that revenge had not brought me the closure I had hoped for. It had only deepened my wounds and added to my pain. The road to healing was still long and uncertain. But maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for us to find our way back to each other. The months following my act of revenge were a tumultuous period of self-reflection and emotional turmoil. Sarah and I continued to live under the same roof, but our interactions were strained and infrequent. The therapy sessions helped, but they could only do so much. Every time I looked at her, I saw the betrayal, and every time she looked at me, she saw the anger and the pain. I had thrown myself into work, using it as a distraction from the chaos at home. My boss, David, was long gone, his career in ruins thanks to the evidence I had leaked. The company was still reeling from the fallout, and I was doing my best to keep my head down and avoid any unnecessary attention. One evening, as I was working late in my office, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "We need to talk. It's important." My heart sank. We had been avoiding this moment for too long, and now it seemed there was no escaping it. When I got home, Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in her hands. She looked up as I entered, her eyes tired but resolute. I could tell she had been crying, but there was a determination in her gaze that I hadn't seen before. "John, we can't keep living like this," she began, her voice steady but soft. "We need to have a serious conversation about our future." I nodded, taking a seat across from her. "I know," I said, my voice heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. "It's time to face the truth." Sarah took a deep breath, setting her cup down. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about what happened, and about where we go from here. I know I hurt you in ways that are unimaginable, and I don't expect you to forgive me easily, if ever." "Sarah, it's not just about forgiveness," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "It's about trust. You broke that trust, and I don't know if it can ever be repaired." "I understand," she replied, her eyes filling with tears. "But I still love you, John. I always have. I made a terrible mistake, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right, to try and rebuild what we had." I looked at her, seeing the pain and regret etched on her face. Part of me wanted to believe her, to hope that we could somehow find a way back to each other. But another part of me, the part that had been deeply scarred by her betrayal, couldn't let go of the past. "Sarah, I don't know if I can ever move past this," I said, my voice breaking. "The pain is still too raw, too fresh. Every time I see you, I remember what you did, and it tears me apart." She reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. "John, please, let's try. Let's see if we can find a way to heal, together. I'm willing to put in the work, to be patient, to do whatever it takes." I sighed, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. "I don't know, Sarah. I just don't know." We sat in silence for a while, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, Sarah spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you can't see a future for us, if you can't find it in your heart to try, then maybe we need to consider a different path." "What are you saying?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Maybe we need to separate," she said, her eyes filled with sorrow. "At least for a while. Give ourselves some space to heal, to figure out what we really want." The thought of separating from Sarah, of ending our marriage, was almost too much to bear. But deep down, I knew she was right. We couldn't keep living in this limbo, torturing each other with our unresolved pain and anger. "Maybe you're right," I admitted, my voice heavy with resignation. "Maybe some time apart will help us see things more clearly." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I never wanted this, John. I never wanted to hurt you. But I understand if this is what you need." We spent the next few hours discussing the logistics of our separation. Sarah would stay in the house with the kids, while I would find an apartment nearby. We agreed to continue therapy, both individually and as a couple, to see if there was any hope of reconciliation in the future. As the conversation came to an end, I felt a strange sense of relief. The decision had been made, and while it was painful, it also felt like a step towards healing. We had been stuck in a cycle of anger and resentment for too long, and maybe this separation would give us the space we needed to find some clarity. The next morning, I packed a suitcase and left the house, my heart heavy with a mix of emotions. I found a small apartment a few miles away and began the process of setting up a new life. It was strange being on my own after so many years of marriage, but it also felt like a chance to rediscover who I was outside of the pain and betrayal. Sarah and I kept our communication to a minimum, focusing on the practicalities of co-parenting and managing our separate lives. The therapy sessions continued, offering a glimmer of hope that maybe, someday, we could find a way to heal the deep wounds that had been inflicted. But, for now, we were two broken people, trying to navigate a path forward in the aftermath of betrayal. The road ahead was uncertain, but at least we had taken the first step towards finding some semblance of peace. The weeks turned into months, and the initial shock of our separation began to settle into a routine. Sarah and I kept our interactions civil, focused primarily on the kids and their well-being. Emily and Jack were understandably confused and hurt by the sudden changes in our family dynamic, but we did our best to reassure them that they were loved and that the separation was not their fault. The therapy sessions continued to be a lifeline for both of us. Individually, we worked through our pain, guilt, and anger. Together, in our couples sessions, we began to address the deep wounds that had festered in our marriage. It was a slow, painful process, but it was also necessary if we were ever going to find a way forward, whether that meant reconciliation or a permanent split. I found solace in my new apartment, a modest place that offered a sense of peace and solitude. I decorated it with simple, functional furniture, trying to create a space that felt like my own. It was strange living alone after so many years of marriage, but it also gave me the opportunity to reflect on my life and my choices. One evening, as I was unpacking a box of old photographs, I came across a picture of Sarah and me on our wedding day. We looked so young, so full of hope and dreams for the future. The memory brought a wave of sadness, but also a reminder of the love that had once bound us together. I realized that despite everything, a part of me still cared for her deeply. Our therapy sessions began to take on a different tone as we started to explore the possibility of rebuilding our relationship. We talked about our hopes and fears, our regrets, and our dreams. We acknowledged the mistakes we had made and the ways we had hurt each other. It was painful, but it was also cathartic, allowing us to see each other in a new light. One afternoon, after a particularly intense session, Sarah and I decided to take a walk together. The air was crisp and cool, the leaves crunching under our feet as we strolled through the park. It felt like a step towards something new, something hopeful. "John," Sarah began, her voice hesitant, "I know I've hurt you deeply, and I don't expect you to forgive me easily. But I want you to know that I'm committed to making things right, whatever that means for us." I nodded, appreciating her honesty. "I've been thinking a lot about us, too. About what we had, and what we lost. I'm not sure if we can ever go back to the way things were, but maybe we can find a new way forward." She smiled, a hint of hope in her eyes. "I'd like that. I'd like to try." As we walked in silence, I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to heal and rebuild our lives, whether together or apart. Over the next few months, we continued our therapy and began to spend more time together as a family. We took the kids on outings, had dinners together, and tried to create new memories that weren't overshadowed by the past. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of pain and resentment, but there were also moments of genuine connection and understanding. One evening, as we sat on the porch of our old house, watching the sunset, Sarah turned to me with a serious expression. "John, I know this is going to sound sudden, but I've been thinking a lot about us, about our future, and I want to know if you're willing to give us another chance." Her words took me by surprise, and I took a moment to gather my thoughts. "Sarah, I care about you, and part of me wants to try. But I'm also scared. Scared of getting hurt again, scared of repeating the same mistakes." "I understand," she said softly, "and I'm scared too. But I believe we've both grown, that we've both learned from this, and maybe, just maybe, we can create something even stronger than before." I looked into her eyes, seeing the sincerity and the hope. "Okay," I said finally. "Let's try, but we need to take it slow, one step at a time." She smiled, a tear rolling down her cheek. "Thank you, John. Thank you for giving us a chance." The decision to try again was not made lightly. We both knew that it would take time, patience, and a lot of hard work. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of optimism about our future. We had faced the worst, and we had survived. Now it was time to see if we could thrive. We continued our therapy, delving deeper into the issues that had plagued our marriage. We set boundaries, made commitments, and worked on rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. It was a slow process, but with each passing day, we grew closer. Emily and Jack were cautiously hopeful, seeing the changes in us. They had been through so much, and we wanted to show them that love and forgiveness were possible, even after the deepest of wounds. One night, as we sat together in the living room, Sarah reached for my hand. "I know we have a long way to go, but I believe in us, John. I believe we can make this work." I squeezed her hand, feeling a sense of resolve. "So do I, Sarah. So do I." Our journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, I felt that we were on the right path. The road ahead would be challenging, but with hope, love, and determination, we were ready to face it together. The decision to give our marriage another chance was both exhilarating and daunting. As Sarah and I embarked on this new journey together, we knew we had to approach it with patience, honesty, and a willingness to confront our past while building a new future. It wasn't easy, but the effort we put in started to show results, and slowly, the pieces of our broken relationship began to fit together again. Our therapy sessions continued to be a cornerstone of our healing process. Dr. Ellis, our couples therapist, guided us through the labyrinth of emotions that had entangled us. She helped us communicate more effectively, understand each other's perspectives, and learn how to forgive, not just each other, but ourselves as well. We were learning to let go of the resentment and anger that had poisoned our hearts, replacing them with empathy and understanding. Sarah had taken a new job, one that didn't demand the long hours and constant travel that her previous position had required. She was more present at home, and her genuine efforts to rebuild trust were evident in everything she did. She was open about her whereabouts, and our conversations were more meaningful and heartfelt. The Sarah I had fallen in love with was beginning to re-emerge, and it reignited a spark that I thought had been extinguished forever. One weekend, we decided to take a family trip to the mountains. It was a chance to get away from the daily grind and reconnect in a place that had always brought us peace. Emily and Jack were excited, and their enthusiasm was contagious. As we hiked through the trails, breathing in the crisp mountain air and marveling at the beauty around us, I felt a sense of unity and hope that had been missing for so long. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Sarah and I sat by the campfire, the flames casting a warm glow on our faces. She reached out and took my hand, her touch gentle and reassuring. "John, I know we've been through so much, and I can't thank you enough for giving us this chance," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "I promise you, I will never take our relationship for granted again." I looked into her eyes, seeing the sincerity and love that had drawn me to her all those years ago. "Sarah, I believe in us. We've come a long way, and I know we can make it if we keep working at it. I love you." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she leaned in to kiss me, a kiss that was both tender and filled with the promise of a new beginning. As we sat there, wrapped in each other's arms, I realized that we had truly turned a corner. The pain of the past was still there, but it was no longer an insurmountable barrier. It was a part of our story, a chapter that had shaped us, but it did not define us. Back home, we continued to strengthen our relationship. We made time for date nights, revisiting places that held special memories for us and creating new ones. We took up hobbies together, finding joy in shared activities that brought us closer. We were rediscovering each other, not just as spouses, but as friends and partners. Emily and Jack noticed the changes too. Their initial skepticism gave way to cautious optimism, and eventually to genuine happiness. We were not just repairing our marriage, we were healing our family. The house, once filled with tension and unease, was now a place of laughter and love. As the months passed, the scars of betrayal began to fade. They would never disappear completely, but they no longer dictated our lives. We had found a new rhythm, one that was built on mutual respect, understanding, and a deep appreciation for the second chance we had been given. One sunny afternoon, as we were working in the garden, Sarah turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "John, there's something I want to talk to you about," she said, wiping the sweat from her brow. "Sure, what's on your mind?" I asked, setting down my tools and giving her my full attention. "I've been thinking a lot about our journey, about everything we've been through, and I think it's time we did something to mark this new chapter in our lives, something to symbolize our commitment to each other and to our future." "What do you have in mind?" I asked, curious. She smiled, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "I want us to renew our vows, to stand before our family and friends and reaffirm our love and dedication to each other." The idea took me by surprise, but as I thought about it, a sense of rightness settled over me. Renewing our vows would be a powerful way to celebrate our journey and the strength of our love. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Sarah," I said, my heart swelling with affection. "Let's do it." We spent the next few months planning the ceremony. It was a small, intimate affair, held in the garden of our home. Emily and Jack helped with the preparations, and our closest friends and family gathered to witness our recommitment to each other. On the day of the ceremony, as I stood at the altar waiting for Sarah, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the journey we had undertaken, for the love that had sustained us, and for the future that lay ahead. When Sarah appeared, walking down the aisle in a simple but elegant dress, my breath caught in my throat. She was radiant, her smile brighter than the sun. As she reached my side, we took each other's hands, our eyes locked in a gaze that spoke volumes. "John, you are my best friend, my partner, and the love of my life," Sarah began, her voice steady and filled with emotion. "I stand here today, not just to renew my vows, but to pledge my unwavering commitment to you and to our journey together. I promise to cherish and honor you, to support you in all that you do, and to love you with all my heart for all the days of our lives." Tears filled my eyes as I responded, "Sarah, you are my heart, my soul, and my everything. I promise to stand by you, to cherish you, and to love you through all the highs and lows. Our journey has not been easy, but it has made us stronger. I vow to be the partner you deserve, to nurture our love, and to build a future filled with joy and happiness together." As we exchanged rings and sealed our vows with a kiss, the applause of our loved ones filled the air. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy, a testament to our resilience and the enduring power of love. The reception that followed was filled with laughter, dancing, and heartfelt toasts. Emily and Jack each gave speeches, expressing their happiness and pride in seeing us rebuild our relationship. It was a celebration of not just our marriage, but of our family and the bonds that held us together. As the sun set and the evening drew to a close, Sarah and I stole away to a quiet corner of the garden. We stood there, hand in hand, watching the stars twinkle above us. "We did it, John," Sarah said softly, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. "We really did it." "Yes, we did," I replied, pulling her close. "And I wouldn't want to be anywhere else, with anyone else." In that moment, under the vast expanse of the night sky, I realized that our journey had brought us full circle. We had faced unimaginable pain and heartbreak, but we had emerged stronger, more connected, and more in love than ever before. Our new life was just beginning, and while the road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, I knew that we would face them together, with love, trust, and an unbreakable bond that would see us through. As we stood there, embracing the beauty of our new beginning, I whispered a silent vow to myself, to cherish every moment, to honor our journey, and to never take for granted the love that had brought us back to each other. And so, with hearts full of hope and hands intertwined, Sarah and I stepped into our new life, ready to face whatever the future held, together.